Thank you, and thanks so much for inviting me today, Tim, Natalie, Ella. It's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about this report. We launched this report in December last year. Kieran launched it on ABC Breakfast. And what we're excited about doing now is actually having this big conversation about this report and talking to you about what your feelings are about the megatrends we've identified going forward and how they're going to shape planning, because the whole idea about this report is forewarned is forearmed, which means that you can incorporate a lot of the findings from this report into your planning for the next 10 years, particularly in the lead up to the Brisbane 2032 Olympics and Paralympic Games. So I'd like to start, of course, by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting today. They are the Turrbal and the Yagara people of the Moreton Bay area, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for the meeting space today. So this report is part of the work that we do in Data 61, and if you don't know, Data 61 is the data analytics area of CSIRO. So CSIRO is broadly known for industrial science, particularly chemicals and agriculture. But about 10 years ago, it was seen that we really needed to up our national science capability in ICT and data analytics. So Data 61 was born. Data 61, the 61 in that, if you don't know, is the telephone code of Australia, which is old technology, but we're the digital agency of CSIRO. But strategic foresight is our old method of looking forward. So what we do is we look at the data, we look at the trends, but there's only so much you can extrapolate out with data before it becomes unreliable. So I could tell you the unemployment rate for next year, possibly with some degree of accuracy, but I couldn't tell you what it would be in 10 years' time with any assurance whatsoever. It would be misleading. So what we do in strategic foresight is look at the main drivers of change which accompany things into the long-term future. So they're the things we can predict, and then we look at their effect on the industry of focus. And when we look at the strategic futures, there's a number of futures, and we often look at possible, plausible and probable. And in that too, you can have a preferable future. So that might be that every Australian Olympian wins a gold medal in 2032. But we also look at some mega shocks. So they're things that might happen between now and then, which means that what we think is going to happen is totally not going to happen. And I'm thinking that the organisers of the Tokyo Olympics thought that when the pandemic hit in 2020. So they had to pivot really quickly into another future. And what we do with our strategic foresight process is we scope the background, we do a broad horizon trend, and we look at all the trends affecting that sector, so geopolitical, economic, environmental, social, technological is our speciality. And then we classify and we try and group them into these mega trends. And that's what I'm talking to you about today. We can also do things like scenario planning, where we take those megatrends and we create 4 scenarios that might happen and look at the pivots that we might have to do between them. And then we craft and communicate a narrative, because what we also know in the data sciences is that people don't actually listen to data, they listen to stories. So what we try and do is tell that story out to 2032 or whatever year we're going to. So it's part science, part art, part English, part storytelling. We do it across a range of areas, and in 2013 we did the first Megatrends in Australian Sports report, and it became one of our most highly cited documents. It's mentioned in Hansard, it's used a lot by sporting organisations, and it outlines 6 megatrends going forward. And when I look back over those 6 megatrends, they pretty much played out. There were things like the rise in personalised fitness. They're from extreme to mainstream. So they were the things which are now in sports, like surfing and rock climbing and that sort of thing. They were extreme back then, they're now more mainstream. So a lot of those megatrends actually played out, and they informed sporting organisations going forward. So this time we worked with the Australian Sports Commission, with the Clearinghouse for Australian Sport people, and if you're after some data on Australian sport, they're a great place to start. The beautiful Christine May, who manages the Clearinghouse of Sport, is putting up data-driven documents on that site all the time. But we worked with the ASC to do this report going forward to the 2032 Olympics. So the aim was to refresh the megatrends from the last 10 years and to look at what we need to plan for going up to the Olympics. So the methodology we used in this report, I can see the screen there, was to scope the background really broadly with the Australian Sports Commission group that we had as the main steering committee, and then to go out and do a broad horizon scan. Is what we're told happening? We looked at all the journal data, we looked at reference documents from overseas, we tried to work out whether those trends were continuing or whether they were just merely observations. And then we had a number of focus groups. I think there are about 12 or 10 focus groups in this research, with over 120 participants in them, and they were the leaders of a lot of the sports groups, national sports groups around the country. And we asked them, what is happening in sport? What are the trends you can see? What are the barriers? What are the drivers of the sport in your area? And then coming out of those focus groups, again, we took all the focus group notes and we went out and we tried to validate them and look for data to support them or not support them. And then from that, because we started off with initial megatrends, we scrapped those and we created new megatrends based on the information from the experts and from the data from the research that we did. And then we crafted the narratives. And that's where you get the document that we produce today. So as you can see, the future of Australian sport in 2013 had a number of megatrends. We've refreshed them, and they're not the same. Some of them you can see the continuation from some of the older megatrends, but they are completely different. We're in a new age. We're in a digital age. We're in an age which is post-pandemic. We're in the thick of climate change responses. It is not 2013, so we have crafted a whole lot of new megatrends to go forward for the next 10 years. So I'll just dive into them because we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards, and I'd really like you to write down lots of questions because, as I said, it's exciting for us to actually start to talk to this report and to start the conversation of what it might mean for your particular organisations. So the first megatrend we called Escalate the Exercise, and it is this big trend in the rise of do-it-yourself individualised exercise activity. So the big growth in sports has been in bushwalking, jogging, cycling, the things that you can download an app and measure your own performance with. It's been associated with the apps, the fitness apps. It's going to the gym, it's yoga, it's all of those individualised things which you can fit into your busy life. You can do wherever you want to do it. You don't have to sign up for anything necessarily, but that's where the big growth has been. But that hasn't come at the expense of organised sports. Organised sports, and this is the graph really to talk to, organised sports have not decreased. So that's the dark blue line. In fact, they've increased slightly over the past decade. They haven't gone down, but what we have seen is the growth in these exercise sports. And that's also accompanied, this is pretty much my megatrend, because it's pretty much accompanied an ageing population, growing health awareness, the use of digital technology, and time poorness. Like, when you're working full time with a family and people to care for on both sides of the generation, this is what you want to do. You want to just download an app and get fit in your own time. But the younger generation are still involved with organised sports, and that the story about organised sports isn't that the exercise is coming at the expense of them. I should note too, in organised sports, there's a few cliffs. One of the cliffs is when people enter high school. They go down. They stop doing a lot of organised sports. Another one is when they go to university or post-high school, stop doing organised sports. And the message there is that, you know, when you're playing organised sports, winning is so important. But a lot of people post-high school just want to exercise regularly to stay fit and have fun. So some of the more successful activities have focused on that fun. The next big megatrend is in high-performance sport. And we heard Kieran talk about all the planning that's happening in high-performance sport, but it is a new world in high-performance sport. And some of the best work is happening here in Queensland with projects at Griffith Uni, such as the Digital Athlete Project, but also looking at new ways of engaging people in high-performance sport and measuring high-performance sport. So it's really being the big trends in high-performance sport or the science and technology are things like individualised athlete-focused training. So instead of focusing on a group of people, you focus on the individual. And this really came from the para-sports area and the Paralympic training regime, which has always been athlete-centric because there's such a diversity, but now they're applying that more to every athlete. So every athlete has personalised training based on the physiology and their psychology and their social circumstances. And that's been a huge trend. More than that, there's far more focus on women and what women need to do to play sports and stay engaged with sports. You know, everything from the equipment they use to training regimes, reproductive strategies or family planning. Like, it's different for women. And there's far more recognition of that in terms of the science and technology of sport. And along with all of this and all the data collection that can go with it, because wearables are everywhere and they're a great way to measure sports performance, but there's the growing concern about too much data and who owns that data. And if you're playing football in an arena and that data is being used to assess you and your future, who has control of that data? So there's far more ethical considerations now in sport, particularly in high-performance sport. And it's funny that when this report was launched, that's the aspect that all the news organisations picked up on, was the growing ethics of data use in sport. It is an issue, and it's also an issue that I think the Australian Sports Commission is well aware of and is getting on top of. It perhaps is not so much of an issue further down, but you know, the Australian Sports Ethics, what's it called? Sports Integrity Commission, SIC, is also looking at a lot of these issues with active research. The next area is the new arena or the new business models, and a lot of the talk this morning here was about how do we get more money into sport? How do we actually you know, particularly the Commonwealth and Olympic sports organisations or the national sports organisations. Well, some sports are doing really well and other sports are not. And there's also, you know, big media deals happening in some areas and not so much with others. The other thing that's happening with apps and, you know, games being televised everywhere is that you know, you can actually get your sport out there in far more ways. So in some cases, audiences for sport are fragmenting. There's also the rise of virtual worlds, AR, VR technology, and the rise of exergaming in that, and the rise of spectators in exergaming and virtual worlds and esports. And the other thing, and things like Peloton, you know, and virtual games, virtual Boston Marathon, the virtual Tour de France. they're all things which are increasing in participation, and a lot of organisations think they're a great thing because they're actually getting people more involved. But it's actually linking those to the sports organisations which can share in some of the profit taking from those developments that might need to happen. Adventure sports are the other big growth area, or the other area where you can see that on one hand there's a lot of screenplay and exergaming, esports and other things. And on the other hand there's this trend in people wanting to go back to nature. So rock climbing, bushwalking, swimming in natural environments. There's a rise in those sorts of sports. People at my work are obsessed with adventure sports, where people get dropped in the desert and have to get somewhere over 3 days by whatever means possible. And people follow them on their apps as little dots on a map or something. I'm not quite sure, but they're extreme sort of fitness marathon sort of events. But they're all, it's not very codified, and it's run by media organisations. So there is a rise in that sort of thing more generally, people wanting to get outdoors to do their sports. And the other big one there, of course, is esports. And whether esport is actually a sport, and it is getting further recognised, more kids are getting involved. If you're like my neighbour who plays soccer on esports, he learnt it to learn the rules, and now he plays actual soccer in real life with the local club. He's very excited about it. So there is the rise of esports, which is also involved with cryptocurrency stakes and rewards, and is funded by some very large players and venture capitalists. So what we're saying, I guess, in this megatrend is that the audience for sports are changing, the business models for sports are changing, and the digital revolution is responsible for a lot of that change. Mind the Gap is about the different groups and the social inclusion of sports. So we have a cultural gap in Australia. 1/3 of Australians were born overseas, 1/3. And a lot of those people have very different ways of interacting on sporting fields to what, you know, the non-immigrant population has. So, you know, making sport more accessible to those people of different cultures is critical for the survival of sports. That might mean different uniforms, it might mean different spaces. But actually including those people, if you don't, you'll miss out on a huge cohort. There's a generation gap. So from the year 2000 onwards, our behaviours changed. We had digital technologies, there was less signing up into a lot of sports organisations. People started to lose digital literacy, or what was called digital literacy, which is coordination, muscle mass, bone density, you know, outdoor long vision type coordination, and but there is a gap between the people born after 2000 and the people born before 2000 in terms of physical literacy. So, you know, actually bridging that divide, bringing more people into sports and the benefits of sports. And it's interesting, I'm going to speak to sporting organisations in high schools soon, but the benefits of sport aren't just physical, they're mental, and you know, we all know this, they're mental, they're social, they're emotional, you know, to develop the emotional intelligence of learning how to lose well, all of that sort of stuff. So actually accentuating the benefits of sport to this group, which were brought up on screens and then suffered a pandemic, is really critical in terms of re-engaging them, engage and activate back into sports. And then there's the abilities gap. So a lot of Australians don't have the full ability of, elite athletes, but they do want to play sport and they do want to compete. You have a fantastic para-sports sector. There's a lot of barriers, as we heard, into para-sports. Overcoming those barriers so that people can play with each other is one of the trends that we see going forward, and that will only become more important as the population ages, as more people become or gain physical limitations. So one of the other trends is sustainability, and we heard a lot about this. The green games are mandated now, or the sustainable games are mandated, but there are other things like feeling safe in sport. So having inclusive behaviours and practices, and there are particular groups in Australian society which feel as though there's more barriers to them, and I'm thinking First Nations people, and when we spoke to a First Nations group, they said that sport made a lot of their players physically ill and scarred them for life. So, you want sport to be safe and inclusive. You don't want it to be competitive to the point at which people are being, they leave the sport with injuries rather than, fitness and all the other great things that sports provide. Safety and integrity in sport is also the focus of the new Safety and Integrity, Sports Safety Integrity Commission. And a lot of that came with the rise of sports betting. In that, if you have people betting on sport, there's more likelihood of sports outcomes being corrupted. So the rise in sports betting, brought about or was part of the motivation of the Sports Integrity Commission. But in that is a really amazing whistleblower avenue so that people can report a whole lot of bad behaviours in sports. So sports overall become more inclusive and safe, and people, love their kids playing sport, they trust their sporting organisation, and, it's part of local development. Athlete expression is also another trend in this, and that is associated with social media, but the biggest Instagram followings on Instagram are soccer players and sports stars, and things they say matter more than say what the club says or more than what the code says. So, there's a massive opportunity there for individuals in sport to espouse the best sporting values, fair play, meritocracy, sustainability, inclusion, all of those things which people are coming out and stating now and being rewarded for on social media. So athlete expression, which was not tolerated in the past, is increasingly tolerated, and even at an Olympic level, you're allowed to show expression for causes in the Olympic spirit before the medal ceremonies at the Games. So there's far greater opportunity, but there's also far greater acceptance of athletic expression. And the final one is the perfect pivot. And this comes back to those mega shocks that may hit organisations. Sports is a very event-based sector. And so, what is happening over the next 10 years is we're going to enter into a period of climatic uncertainty. There's possibly going to be more disease outbreaks to the magnitude of COVID-19. And also there's possibly geopolitical tensions which have upset international competitions in the past. And that also will result in higher security possibly at events. So the perfect pivot is about anticipating some of the change coming about in the next 10 years in terms of the uncertainty, and working out those contingencies for big events like the Games, like the big international competitions where people are expected to come from overseas, and make sure that you've got those contingencies in place. there are, like, you know, we are in a new normal. This wasn't a mega trend in the previous report. So just summing up, I guess when we look at the outlook for sport going forward, there's a lot of amazing and positive things. I'm doing work for the Queensland Government at the moment on you know, the technological drivers for the next 10 years, and sport and the 2032 games features heavily in terms of it's a fantastic technological driver for, you know, sports stadiums and security and ticketing and sports science and, you know, just a range of things that are happening around that event. You know, again, a lot of amazing and fantastic things, and sport is a big part of our society, our economy, and even our cultural identity. So just going forward, I guess, this report really highlights some of the things to be forewarned about so that over the next 10 years we can incorporate in that planning and see the sector thrive.
And we were talking about, so Andrew Parsons, he's the IPC president, and we were talking about esports and how incredible esports is as a catalyst to get people with, you know, more severe disabilities involved in participating in activity. And when you brought that up, it was just so relevant and unreal.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people buckle, or, you know, they get their hackles up about esports and say it's not a sport, it's just thumb play, you know, no one's exercising and they sit around all day. But, you know, there's a lot of, and the people we interviewed, some of them were athletes who said, this was fantastic to channel my abilities into a digital game in the times when I was, you know, on maternity leave or not playing the actual game. I loved playing esports, and I've come out feeling as though I didn't stop playing. So I think, you know, there are pros and cons to esports, but I think the undeniable fact is that it is rising in popularity, and it is about channeling it so that it supports on-field sports and doesn't take away from it.
Absolutely. Up the back. Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm Sunana from Tennis Australia, Women and Girls Lead. I just wanted to touch upon that conversation on esports, and I was wondering if there is any data, or if, like, the industry is working towards accumulating data on that conversion from esports to actually going into reality, like mainstream sport rather.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It came up a lot in the focus group. When, you know, because esports isn't that well supported by formal clubs, you know, it's starting to be. In Australia, there's a group within high schools which are getting together and starting to look at some of these things. There isn't a lot of formal research done because they don't have any money at this stage. But it would be a great thing to look at is the conversion of people who play ESA sports online and how often they then take up the actual sport. I guess, it is only anecdotal at this stage, but I think from my personal experience, I know people who that has happened to. And to me, you know, because we talked to Cycling Australia, for instance. I don't know if there's anyone from Cycling Australia here. No? But they are, you know, like a lot of the national sporting organisations, they struggle to fund events and to run events and that sort of thing. If you paired those actual events to an online event or an event that you could do on a Peloton or something like that, then you would possibly be able to get far more engagement and awareness and switch over to the road events. So I don't know, I feel like there needs to be a bit of coming together of the esports and the other sports for that articulation to really get a lot smoother.
Might have time for one more question if there is one. No? Oh, yes.
Do you have access to any demographic data as it relates to esports? Because it would be interesting to know if this is largely being used to circumnavigate some of the barriers that we see in like a club setting, for instance.
Yeah.
Or
There is data, and it's if you download the report, it's in the references of the report. There's data in Australia in terms of, you know, how much the industry worth, who plays it, the age group that plays it. Yeah, there's not, as I said, there's not a lot of data on what they do next. Just, you know, while they're playing it, this is what they sign up as. So, but it's you know, growing almost exponentially. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously gave it a massive boost as well, because people were sitting home, they wanted to get involved in sporting competitions, and they could download that really easily.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lucy Cameron. It was very insightful, your presentation, and we just appreciate everything that you're doing. So let's put it together for Dr. Lucy Cameron. Thank you.